Welcome back to our channel, Hope. You all are fine, and don't forget to like, share, and let's begin with another day of aviation miracle. The night sky stretched endlessly, a black ocean sprinkled with distant stars. At 35,000 feet, Flight 742 cruised smoothly over the Atlantic, cutting through layers of clouds that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Inside the cockpit, only the soft hum of instruments and the gentle crackle of radio chatter broke the silence. Captain Ethan Ward, a veteran pilot with 20 years of experience, leaned back in his seat. The flight had been uneventful so far, clear skies, calm air, and the soft pulse of autopilot guiding the aircraft toward its destination. Below, the world slept in darkness. Above, the heavens looked peaceful, but sometimes peace hides the strangest of secrets. As the aircraft crossed into open airspace, the radar screen glowed a calm green. Then, out of nowhere, a faint blip flickered on the far edge, too small, too fast to identify. Ethan squinted, adjusted the brightness, and leaned closer. The signal appeared again there for barely a second, then gone. He frowned, making a mental note. Could be interference, he thought, or a weather reflection. Nothing unusual. Outside, the stars glimmered cold and distant. Then suddenly a light moved among them. It wasn't a star. It wasn't stationary. It was gliding, almost dancing. Across the horizon, a soft, silvery glow that pulsed rhythmically like it was alive. Ethan's instincts immediately sharpened. He glanced at the altitude, steady. Airspeed normal, no turbulence. Yet the light outside seemed to be moving faster than any known aircraft could. At first it appeared miles away, just a faint shimmer. Then, within seconds, it grew brighter, closer, almost parallel to the jet's path. His pulse quickened. The object wasn't on radar. It wasn't on the traffic control display either. Still, there it was flying right beside them, silent and smooth, like a phantom tracing their course through the sky. The glow intensified, shifting from white to a cold metallic blue. The object seemed circular, its surface reflecting faint streaks of light like liquid metal. For a moment, Ethan could almost see patterns, geometric rings that rotated subtly, as if the craft itself was breathing. He couldn't hear it, couldn't feel it, but he could sense it. Inside the cabin, passengers remained unaware, wrapped in blankets and dim light, the cabin crew preparing for the next service round. But in the cockpit, time slowed. Ethan's breathing deepened. His hand hovered near the throttle, ready for anything. He didn't believe in the supernatural, not really, but this was no ordinary object. The UFO held its position for several seconds, flying perfectly level beside the aircraft, matching its speed and altitude, something no known jet could do without visible propulsion. No contrails, no sound, no turbulence. Then, in an instant, it shot forward a streak of blinding light that vanished ahead into the dark horizon. The movement was so fast it barely registered one frame of motion, then nothing. The cockpit returned to stillness. For several long seconds, Ethan sat frozen, eyes fixed on the empty sky where the object had disappeared. His mind raced through possibilities. A reflection? A satellite? A military drone? But nothing fit. Not at that altitude, not at that speed. The radar screen stayed blank. He checked the instruments again. Altitude steady. Airspeed normal. Systems were fine. Everything looked ordinary. But he knew what he'd seen. Then the aircraft's exterior lights flickered once, twice. A faint electric buzz echoed through the cockpit. For a heartbeat, the panels dimmed as though a magnetic wave had brushed past. Ethan's stomach tightened. He reached for the auxiliary controls, ready to switch power systems, but the lights stabilized, and everything returned to normal. Still, the timing was too close to be coincidence. Far below, lightning rippled across. A distant thunderhead, white veins tearing through. The clouds, but the skies above remained clear. The stars looked the same. Yet something felt profoundly altered, as though the night had witnessed something it couldn't explain. He stared into the horizon again, searching for any sign of the object, a flash, a movement, anything. Nothing. Just silence. And then the radio crackled. A faint distortion crawled through the headset, almost like static but layered deep. Pulsing, rhythmic, not like interference, more like a sound not meant for human ears. The transmission cut in and out, forming broken bursts of noise before clearing again. Air traffic control's voice returned normal. Calm routine asking for a position check. Ethan responded mechanically, eyes still glued to the night. As the minutes passed, the unease deepened. His rational mind fought with what he'd seen or what he thought he'd seen. Thousands of hours in the sky, and he had never witnessed anything remotely like this. He recorded the time, position, and direction in his flight log just in case. For the next hour, the flight continued smoothly. The passengers remained asleep, the crew unaware. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every few minutes, he scanned the sky left, right, above, below. Nothing but the endless void. Yet his instincts whispered that the object wasn't gone only. Observing from a distance, at one point, a faint reflection danced. Across the wings, metallic, surface a brief shimmer that didn't belong to the moon or stars. He blinked, and it disappeared again. His heartbeat slowed, but his grip on the yoke stayed firm. Somewhere out there, in the dark expanse beyond their reach, something had crossed paths with human flight, and for reasons unknown, it had chosen to reveal itself. The flight finally entered descent hours later, approaching the coastline. The first hints of dawn began to color the edge of the sky, pink and orange brushing against fading stars. The world below woke slowly, unaware of what had unfolded above their heads. Ethan's eyes lingered on the horizon, now glowing faintly gold. For a moment, he felt relief. The night was over, but as the sunlight spread across the clouds, something shimmered once more high above, like a fading echo of that metallic blue light. It hovered for a heartbeat, then dissolved into the brightness of dawn. The radar remained blank. And yet, he knew it was there, somewhere beyond human comprehension, watching, waiting as silent as the stars themselves. Morning arrived like a slow revelation. Golden sunlight broke through thin layers of clouds as Flight 742 descended toward its destination. Passengers stirred awake, unaware that their quiet overnight journey had brushed against something unexplainable. For Captain Ethan Ward, the night felt longer than any flight he'd ever taken. The glowing object still haunted the corners of his mind, that pulsing blue light that had moved like thought itself, silent and fast beyond all logic. When the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, the world below seemed normal again. Ground crew waved. Engines roared down. Passengers clapped softly, relieved to arrive. But behind Ethan's calm composure, his thoughts churned. He knew what he'd seen, and he knew it wasn't supposed to exist. Inside the terminal, sunlight spilled through tall glass windows. The other crew members chatted lightly, discussing schedules and upcoming layovers. Ethan signed the post-flight paperwork mechanically, but when he reached the incident log, he hesitated. There was no official term for what had happened. No unidentified flying object category on the form, only boxes for turbulence, bird strike, or mechanical anomaly. Still, after a long pause, he began to write. His pen moved slowly, describing what he could. Bright circular object observed at FL 350 eastbound, matching aircraft speed for several seconds before accelerating out of sight. No radar confirmation. Possible interference noted. It was factual, simple, careful, but the truth behind those words burned brighter than the sun outside. Hours later, he filed the report with Air Traffic Operations Control, just as procedure demanded. Usually such reports ended up buried, reviewed once, then forgotten. But this one, it seemed, would not be so easily ignored. 2 days passed. The report had reached higher levels than expected. Ethan received a call from a civil aviation investigator, requesting a confidential meeting. They wanted to discuss anomalous visual phenomena. The term felt designed to sound harmless, bureaucratic. But Ethan knew better. In a quiet room at the operations center, the investigator listened without interruption as Ethan recounted every detail. From the flicker on radar to the electric buzz in the cockpit. The man took notes, occasionally nodding, but his eyes betrayed curiosity mixed with disbelief. When Ethan finished, silence filled the space. Then the investigator produced a small recorder, pressed play, and let Ethan listen. At first it was faint, static, ordinary radio noise. Then came the sound. That same low, rhythmic pulse Ethan had heard after the object vanished. But now, isolated through audio filters, it was clearer, almost patterned. The frequency pulsed like coded signals, evenly spaced. Too structured to be interference, too consistent to be natural. Ethan felt the hairs on his arms rise. It was the same sound that had haunted the cockpit that night. The investigator paused the recording and looked up. He didn't explain where it came from, only said it was captured by multiple aircraft over the Atlantic, all within the same 10-minute window as Ethan's sighting. Multiple aircraft. Ethan's heart sank and steadied at once. He wasn't alone. Whatever he'd seen, others had too. Days turned into a week. Media outlets buzzed faintly about pilot UFO chatter over the Atlantic, but nothing concrete surfaced. Aviation authorities issued no official comment. Yet behind closed doors, analysts and air defense units were reviewing radar, anomalies, faint energy signatures. Not consistent with aircraft, moving against the wind, Ethan, meanwhile, found his nights restless. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw that light hovering, silent, intelligent. He replayed every frame in memory, searching for logic, for science, for sense. But all he found was silence. Until one evening, during another routine flight, it happened again. Not the object, not yet, but the feeling. At 30,000 feet over open ocean, as the aircraft cruised through clear air, the radar blinked once. A faint echo, then gone. The same as before. Ethan's chest tightened. He leaned forward, checking all systems. Nothing irregular, yet the tension in the air was unmistakable. And then the radio distortion returned. That low, humming pulse crept into the headset, soft, distant, deliberate. It lasted 5 seconds, then vanished. The co-pilot noticed the static, adjusted frequency, and moved on. But Ethan knew. It wasn't random. It wasn't technical. It was recognition. Like something out there remembered him. Far below, lightning flashed on the horizon, a storm forming over the sea. The world around the plane looked vast, silent, endless. And yet within that silence, Ethan felt presence. Invisible, distant, but aware. He logged the event again, his handwriting slower this time. Signal interference identical to previous anomaly. No visual contact, crew unaffected. But deep down, he understood what that meant. It was following. A few nights later, an official report appeared on an encrypted Aviation database restricted to pilot access only. It summarized multiple sightings from different routes, all describing the same pattern: a glowing circular object, metallic reflection, rapid acceleration, electromagnetic interference. No official explanation attached. Only the words, "pending further verification." Ethan read it 3 times, each line confirming what his eyes had already told him weeks earlier. Whatever this phenomenon was, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't a trick of light. It was real. And then came the strangest detail: a radar timestamp log. Cross-referencing his own flight time with other aircraft, Ethan noticed something chilling. The object's trajectory formed a pattern. It wasn't random. It had moved deliberately across specific coordinates, almost tracing a flight path of its own. Back home, Ethan sat by his window long after midnight, watching planes blink through the distant sky. Their navigation lights flickered red and white against the stars. He wondered how many of those pilots, right now, might be seeing something they couldn't explain and staying silent. The world moved on as usual. The news cycle faded. The skies seemed ordinary again, but Ethan couldn't forget that brief moment in the dark, when humanity's oldest question had glided silently beside his plane, leaving only light, static, and mystery in its wake. And deep inside him, a strange realization formed. Whatever it wasn't hostile. It hadn't attacked. It had only watched, as if studying. Perhaps they weren't visitors from beyond. Perhaps they'd always been here, waiting for someone to finally look back. Each sighting aligned in sequence, like waypoints on an invisible route. A route that ended exactly where Flight 742 had been. His plane wasn't just a witness that night. It was the target. The night was calm again. Clear skies stretched endlessly across the upper atmosphere, and the moon hung like a silver coin above the horizon. Captain Ethan Ward was back in the cockpit, months after his first encounter, flying a different route, different crew, but the same quiet expanse above the Atlantic. Everything felt ordinary, routine, predictable, until the hum of the engines began to change. It started subtle, a faint tremor in the sound, like a soft distortion, then faded away. The instrument stayed steady. Autopilot held the course. Nothing looked wrong, but Ethan's instincts stirred. It was the same kind of silence that had come before the light. He glanced at the radar, nothing. Altitude, 36,000 feet. Airspeed, nominal. Outside, the stars shimmered over the ocean's darkness. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a quiet dread was building a sense that something was near. A faint reflection glinted off the right wing, quick silver, almost playful. Ethan leaned forward. The reflection disappeared. Then came the light. Not bright this time, just a faint orb hovering far ahead, flickering like a heartbeat. Blue, white, blue again. It pulsed gently in rhythm with the hum of the aircraft, as if listening. He knew that pattern. He'd seen that glow before. The object was closer than it appeared. Within seconds, it grew larger, and then, with impossible smoothness, it matched their speed and trajectory, positioning itself just beyond the cockpit's right window. The UFO was smaller this time, circular, fluid, its edges hazy, like it existed halfway between light and matter. Its center emitted no flame, no exhaust, only an energy that shimmered and bent the air around it. The cockpit instruments flickered lights, dimming for an instant, then stabilizing. But then, the first alarm sounded. A soft beep, followed by another. Altitude reading wavered not much, just a few digits, then corrected itself. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He disengaged autopilot and took manual control, steadying the aircraft. Every training instinct kicked in. His movements were precise. Calm, deliberate, but inside, he could feel something strange. A static charge crawling in the air, as though the plane itself had entered an invisible storm. The UFO drifted closer, its glow illuminating the right engine. The surface of the object seemed almost liquid, reflecting the moonlight in swirling ripples. It hovered silently, no turbulence, no impact on the aircraft's stability. Yet the entire control panel shimmered faintly as if reacting to its presence. Then the radio died. Complete silence filled the cockpit. No static, no signal, no control tower. The only sound was the deep mechanical hum of the engines and Ethan's own breathing. He tried the backup frequency, nothing. Even the emergency transponder flashed weakly, its light pulsing in rhythm with the UFO outside. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't chasing. It was simply there observing. The co-pilot glanced out the window, frozen in disbelief. Outside, the object rotated slowly, showing faint rings within its core geometric, pulsing like a mechanical heartbeat. For a brief second, Ethan could swear he saw symbols moving within the light, patterns too precise to be random. And then the entire cockpit lit up. The object released a wave of pure white-blue illumination, not blinding, but soft, immersive. Every metal surface in the cockpit shimmered. For 3 long seconds, the plane was surrounded in radiance, floating in silence, weightless, timeless. And then, darkness. Everything powered down. The lights, the displays, the radar all dead. The engines still turned, but the instruments showed nothing. The plane was alive, yet blind. Ethan's pulse pounded. He focused on maintaining altitude by instinct alone, using the faint horizon line outside the windshield. His hands remained firm on the yoke. For a man who had flown through storms, failures, and engine fires, this invisible stillness was far more terrifying. Outside, the object hovered closer, its glow steady. It was no longer pulsing, almost as if it was listening. The cockpit air felt thick, electric. A faint vibration passed through the seats, the floor, even the metal frames of the controls, as though the object was scanning the aircraft, searching, understanding. And then, just as suddenly as it came, the lights returned. Every system blinked back to life, instruments recalibrated. The radio came alive with static, then normal air traffic chatter. The alarm stopped. The object drifted backward slowly. Its glow dimmed, then faded to a faint blue spark in the distance. Within seconds, it vanished completely, dissolving into the night as if it had never existed. The plane flew on, untouched, unhurt. But inside, the silence said everything. Ethan didn't speak, didn't write, didn't even move for a full minute. He simply watched the empty horizon, the place where the impossible had been. Then he noticed something strange, a faint shimmer across the windshield. Tiny glowing particles, like dust illuminated by sunlight, were gently floating in the cockpit air. They glowed faintly blue, lingering only for seconds before disappearing into nothing. He touched one and it dissolved into warmth. Not heat, not static. Just warmth, almost human, almost curious. By the time the aircraft landed, all systems were normal. The maintenance crew found no issues. Flight data logs showed only a brief 2-second electrical anomaly too. Short to trigger alerts. No radar picked up anything unusual. But something had changed. Later, when Ethan reviewed the cockpit voice recording, He found that during those few seconds of blackout, the recorder had captured something faint, not radio chatter, not interference. It was a sound. Soft, layered, rhythmic, the same pulse as before. But this time, under the frequency, a faint human-like whisper. Indistinct, fragmented, almost like a word. A single syllable, hard to decode but eerily familiar. He replayed it several times. It sounded like, "Here." That night, after submitting his second report, Ethan sat in the quiet of his hotel room, staring at the stars outside his window. He thought of the object, the silence, the impossible calm of that light. Whatever it wasn't meant to frighten. It felt aware, purposeful, observing them not as threats, but as something curious, like a scientist watching life unfold. And as he looked at the night sky, the same sky that had once seemed infinite and empty, he felt something new stirring inside him. Not fear, not confusion, wonder. Somewhere out there, above the clouds and beyond the reach of radar, something had watched humanity's fragile machine skim the edge of the heavens. And for reasons no one could explain, it had chosen not to harm, not to vanish forever, but to return and leave a trace of light, as if to say, "We see you too." Days passed. The world below moved on, unaware that far above the clouds, something had stirred. Something that had brushed against the edge of human understanding. Captain Ethan Ward's flight report was quietly marked, classified. Yet behind that label, a dozen experts gathered to study every second of his black box data. The file was strange, nearly perfect, except for 8 seconds of distortion during the electrical blackout. 8 seconds that refused to be explained. The investigators were silent at first. Then they ran the data again and again. Within those 8 seconds, buried deep within the static, a pulse signal repeated, symmetrical, deliberate, almost intelligent, like a language but not made of words. When amplified, it formed a rhythmic pattern of 7 tones, each separated by precise intervals. No radio interference matched it. No frequency from Earth explained it. Ethan was called back in. He sat in the observation room, the same quiet chamber where months ago he had described the light, the silence and the warmth in the air. On the large screen before him, the waveform played. The tones echoed softly through the speakers. Low, low, high, pause, high, low, low. Simple yet haunting, like a heartbeat trying to communicate. Then the screen flickered, and a visual analysis appeared, spectral lines glowing against the black background. The pattern repeated in symmetrical arcs, like an ancient design written in sound. One of the analysts leaned forward, tracing the shapes on the monitor. "It's geometry," someone whispered behind the glass. Not random noise. The pattern mirrored something Ethan had seen before. The rotating rings within the UFO's core, spinning slowly, pulsing in that same rhythm. A memory surfaced. That brief whisper on the cockpit recorder. The faint syllable that sounded like "here." It wasn't imagination. It was a transmission. But what did it mean? Outside the facility, autumn winds swept across the runway. Planes took off one by one, climbing into the same skies that had once glowed with impossible light. For the world, nothing had changed. Flights continued. Life continued. Yet for Ethan, the world had quietly expanded, like he had peeked through a doorway that was never meant to be opened. That night, unable to sleep, he opened the cockpit voice recording again. He filtered the background noise, layered the frequencies, slowed the rhythm. When the pulse played at 1/4 speed, something happened. The tones transformed, no longer alien. They formed a melody, soft, deliberate, rising and falling like a human hum, almost peaceful. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was music. For minutes, Ethan sat there, listening to that fragile tune echo through his room, the voice of something vast and patient, drifting through static from the edge of the stars. Then, at the end of the 8-second mark, a faint signature tone emerged, a harmonic note perfectly aligned with the aircraft's frequency response. It was as if the object had synchronized itself with the plane, mimicking it, learning from it, perhaps even understanding it. The sound faded, but it left behind a sense of profound stillness. Weeks later, Ethan returned to duty. His story had spread quietly among pilots, not publicly, but through whispers in crew lounges, hangars, and night flights over the ocean. Some dismissed it. Others admitted they'd seen things too: flashes of light, orbs that moved against the wind, radar blips that vanished before anyone could confirm them. But none had experienced the silence he had that moment when technology failed. Yet peace remained. The following month, during a night flight over the Pacific, Ethan found himself alone in the cockpit once more. The co-pilot had stepped out for a moment. The stars outside were endless. The world below was dark, and then faintly the same pulse echoed through his headset. Not loud, not intrusive. Just there. Low, low, high, pause, high, low, low. Exactly the same as before. His heart stopped for an instant. He checked the radio frequency clear. No source, no interference. He looked out the window. The horizon was calm, glowing silver under the moonlight. No lights, no shapes, no craft, only the voice of the sky. Then he realized the tone wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within the aircraft, from the electrical hum of the engine itself, vibrating in harmony, almost like it was answering. Ethan smiled faintly. It didn't feel frightening anymore. It felt known, familiar. The melody faded again, disappearing into the roar of the engines. But before it vanished completely, a final note lingered softer than the rest, higher, almost tender. For the briefest second, he felt that warmth again, the one he'd felt when he touched that glowing particle months ago. It was like a silent acknowledgement, a farewell, or perhaps a promise that humanity had not been alone that night, and would never be again. When the flight landed the next morning, everything seemed ordinary. Passengers clapped. The crew smiled. The world kept spinning, but Ethan didn't file a report this time. He didn't need to, because he had understood. Whatever had flown beside him, whatever intelligence had crossed paths with humanity that night, it hadn't come to harm or to hide. It had come to observe, to connect, to remind a world so obsessed with the noise of engines that sometimes silence itself carries the greatest message. As the sun rose behind the aircraft, Ethan stood at the terminal window, watching the light pour across the horizon. 1,000 contrails crossed the sky like silver threads, weaving the story of humanity's fragile, beautiful reach toward the unknown. And somewhere out there, beyond radar and logic, a faint blue shimmer blinked once against the dawn, then disappeared. Not as a warning, but as a greeting, a reminder that in the vast silence between worlds, someone had finally said hello.